only comes only after you've lost a lawsuit, meaning that you had to have been found negligent in a situation sufficient where you really did cause harm to somebody else, and a judge and or jury have found you guilty of something. So if you're out and you're driving and you cause an accident, if you are on your farm and somebody gets harmed on your farm and you get a lawsuit from that, and you lose all of your assets, because you don't have a distinction in them. All of your assets are subject to being paid over to a creditor if you owe them money. So after all of the insurance is gone, the farm insurance that all of you should be purchasing to operate, after all of that has been exhausted, say $1 million in normal farm income or farm coverage, which is what I would strongly recommend, and then another $1 million on top of that for what's called an umbrella policy. After those $2 million worth of suits have been paid out, then any money that you have saved up, set aside, your farm equipment, all of that stuff could be forced sold to satisfy the balance of the judgment. And I think that people really overshoot how often or how severe that can be. That being said, you guys are probably like me, and you're risk adverse, and you don't want to have that kind of stuff happen, and you want to avoid it. So you start looking at other options out there and other entities or something that you could operate under to shield some of your personal liability or personal assets from your LLC's liability. Before we get to the LLC, the second business structure that we have in Kentucky, and one that if you are taking notes tonight that I would absolutely just write down and say, don't do this ever, there's not a single moment you should ever do this, is something called a general partnership. In Kentucky, we have general partnerships that can be created literally at the drop of a hat. There doesn't need to be any paperwork that goes with it. It's the mere act of operating as a partnership springs a general partnership to life. What I would describe this most common as is somebody saying, let's go partner on this, or they engage in a similar activity together. The most common one that I see normally is a couple of guys go to the stockyards, they buy a load of cattle, and they start splitting, like I need so many, if you're talking about feeder steers or stockers or something like that. And the other person might take 20 or 30 out of the pot load that you bought. In hauling those things home and splitting them up, you might have created a general partnership for the limited purpose of moving cattle. I see partnerships in cattle all the time. A lot of times they go on for years and years and years and years with no problems. But they're incredibly dangerous because the liability that you're exposed to on behalf of your partner is completely 100% unchecked. Other types of general partnerships that I see, if they're not you and your buddy engaging in something, it's you and sibling, you and family member, you and mom and dad have a farming operation together, and you all split proceeds on something for some sort of agreed to shared labor arrangement, shared providing of inputs, splitting those things up. General partnerships can and do arise in situations like that. The downside of a partnership, or say that Spencer, Wynn, and I are partners for the purposes of farming, let's say the Smith farm. So we're there on the Smith farm together. We met through K-Card. We've been friends for a long time, but we're going to go 50-50 on something. And in going 50-50, we're each going to supply what we deem to be half of the inputs together. I see these going from a literal 50-50 split on any bills that you may have from Southern States or your co-op or Nutrien or any other input supplier. Other types of partnerships can be Spencer provides the land, I provide the labor, and then we split the proceeds, the cattle, the crops, whatever that come off of that thing, general partnerships can be created in that situation as well. Now, when we're operating and while I'm performing an act on behalf of the partnership, let's say that I hire somebody to come out to the farm. They're an employee of Clint, and they may or may not have ever even met Spencer. While out there, the employee is harmed because of equipment that I've not maintained, or shielding that I didn't put into place, or removed from the equipment for maintenance or greasing, or anything else on it. And that employee gets hurt, killed, maimed, whatever it is. Not only will they try to sue Clint in that situation, but they may also sue Spencer in that situation, because we were even though it's an unrecorded general partnership, the attorneys, when they get involved, will talk about all the players that are involved, all of the entities that may have been together, and through a series of exchange of documents and questions called discovery in a lawsuit, it'll become apparent through that or a deposition that Spencer and I were partners in this situation. And what's scary about that is, say Spencer was providing the land and he was maybe the pocketbook behind something, and Clint was the labor, maybe a little bit of money, whatever it may be. Let's say that the $100,000 that the lawsuit is for, say Clint cannot provide $100,000 to pay the suit. What the plaintiff in the case can do at that point in obtaining a judgment is not only sue Clint for $100,000, they can also sue Spencer for the complete $100,000, even though our venture was 50-50. So in a general partnership in Kentucky, you have unlimited exposure on a lawsuit for the actions of your partner, so long as whatever caused that action was pursuant to the partnership. So in a sole proprietorship, if Clint harms somebody, it kind of makes sense that 100% of that liability and 100% of that judgment that may take place flows back on Clint. In a general partnership scenario, now Spencer could have caused the harm, and I might not have even been there, but now I am not only 100% responsible for my own actions, now I'm responsible for the actions and the liability or the payout that may come from my partner, Spencer's actions. And it doesn't have to be just one person. To be very clear, in a general partnership, you could have 4 or 5 partners that have split something together. Now, where Spencer and I came together on that on purpose and for a reason, and we started operating together, a lot of farm partnerships are created between siblings, between cousins, or between family members, because they don't have an operating agreement or an entity to operate in other than that. In a sole proprietorship, when I do manage somehow to make some money, I pay taxes on that in a kind of a curious way. During the day, my day job, and with the KDA, at the end of the year, I'm issued a W-2 by the government. So of that W-2, those are wages paid to me by the KDA, and those are subject to, of course, federal income tax and state income tax. With farming in that situation, I'm subject to not only the income taxes that come from the profits that I make, but I'm also responsible for a few other types of taxes that come with that. One being a self-employment tax, and I'm sure all of you guys have paid or will when you meet with your accountant or tax professional this year. But also part of that is you pay the other half of Medicare and Medicaid taxes and Social Security. You kind of get a rebate on part of that when you're doing the forms, but you're paying both sides of the equation essentially in a sole proprietorship. In a general partnership, remember we have 100% exposure to the actions of all of our other partners. In that situation, I receive the exact same tax treatment. So when the distribution or money is paid out of the general partnership, say my cut that year was $10,000 net expenses. When we do that, I am still paying the same amount of taxes as I would have been under a sole proprietorship. So in a sole proprietorship, I have 100% of my liability, and I pay 100% of my taxes. In a general partnership, I'm still paying 100% of the taxes. I'm still responsible for 100% of my liability, but I'm also responsible or potentially responsible for paying 100% of the liability caused by my other partners. So that's why I tell everybody, no matter what you do, either be a sole proprietor or create an entity, but absolutely do not operate under a general partnership because they have all of the drawbacks of other entities with absolutely no additional benefit. So that kind of tees up the ball for, should I incorporate, or why should I incorporate, and what do I need to do that? So in creating an LLC, really mechanically, you're creating a corporation, you're creating an entity. And what happens there is, through filing with the Secretary of State, you're giving birth to a tiny little brand new entity that you need to consider as a tiny individual human that's out there living, meaning that a little baby, you just can't abandon those things with an LLC or other entities, a general partnership, an S Corp, limited liability partnership, other things. Where you have to take care and nurse a child, you have to take care and nurse an entity, meaning that you have to pay taxes separately. You have to file things with the Secretary of State at least annually. You need to have some meetings at least one a year where you're making elections and recording those things about who's going to be the agent, who's going to be in charge of that partnership. But let's say that we do all of those things. Now, once we have our LLC started, we go to our idea in mind. We go to the Secretary of State's website, or we pay somebody to do this. And now mechanically, Quarles Farms that I've been operating under could be registered as Quarles Farms LLC. Once Quarles Farms LLC is created, at that moment, Quarles Farms LLC is legally a distinct thing from Clint Quarles, meaning that the LLC keeps its own books. It keeps absolutely everything separate from me, even though I own 100% of the stock in the LLC. The LLC is never buying a lunch. It's never buying gas or fuel or groceries or anything like that, because the LLC doesn't need that thing. Now, it can buy fuel for the operation of the LLC. If the LLC is operating a tractor, then the LLC would require diesel fuel. The LLC can pay for things like that, but the pots of money, your pot of money, your wallet, stays 100% distinct from a normal, or from you. So the LLC keeps its absolute own set of books. It's 2 checkbooks at any time. It's keeping its own debit card. The LLC is maintaining its own insurance. The LLC is maintaining its own tax records, logs, employment lists, its own EIN that is distinct from yours if you had one when you were operating as a sole proprietor. So the LLC, your requirements to keep books separate is just the same as Lexmark or a large corporation. You're keeping things completely distinct. If you worked for Lexmark or a large corporation, you would never think the company's money is my money, because that would be theft in that situation. So that's the way to step into thinking about an LLC. You're giving birth to something that is completely distinct from you, even though you own all of it, you're the face of the LLC. You're keeping absolutely everything separate. That's probably the biggest downfall I see with an LLC is a whole lot of farmers are so busy actually performing the work of farming or agriculture that they run out of time. They cannot keep those things distinct from themselves. If you cannot keep those things distinct from yourself, there's a legal action called piercing the corporate veil, where essentially the protections that are afforded you with the LLC are set aside, and the court will still sue you individually anyway, because you weren't keeping the LLC books separate. But let's assume for a moment that you can keep everything separate. Now in that same situation, I've got a guy on a mower and or a tractor, and they get hurt with a unshielded power takeoff or something like that. Now the LLC is liable in that situation. The person will sue the LLC for that $100,000, and the LLC will either pay them the $100,000 through a judgment. Their insurance will pay the $100,000, or if the LLC was not maintaining insurance or it's beyond the coverage amount, the LLC will sell assets that it possesses to service the $100,000 debt, or 100 million, or whatever it is. When all of the asset base that's owned by the LLC is exhausted, and you still owe the money after that, the LLC still owes money beyond what the LLC owns. That debt that the LLC can't pay does not come back on you personally simply by owning the stock of the LLC. So a way to think about this is when major corporations fold or declare bankruptcy, let's say it was General Motors a few years ago, or a lot of other very large corporations, FTX for a trading platform recently. When those things fold shop and they still owe money, they don't come back to you as the individual stock owner and say, hey, this is your portion of it, pay us some money. That's simply not how it works. The liability ceases with the value of the stock that you're out. So the LLC is exactly analogous, meaning that once the value of the stock, which is the book value based on the assets that it possesses, once that is done, if you've kept everything distinct, then it will not, that remaining liability will not flow back to you, and your car, your bank account, your house, or your farm, as so long as those things weren't held in the LLC. So Spencer, that's a very long-winded way to talk about the three different entities that you can operate in there in Kentucky. So the real question then becomes, what do I want to do, right? What do I want to create, and can I do that? So I think that was the original question, right? What steps do I need to do to form the LLC to do that if that's what you want to do? So as a lawyer, I'm going to say, decide if you want an LLC first, and then decide, do you have the bandwidth at the end of the day to keep everything absolutely distinct in the LLC from yourself? And if the answer is no, if you don't think that you can commit that amount of time to kind of duplicative efforts on record keeping, then an LLC isn't going to be the salvation tool that you're looking for. Do you think that answers the question, Spencer?
Yeah, and I'm going to piggyback off that with another question too. Is there, I get a question a lot from folks. It's like, well, at what point of gross income or number of acres or number of cows, insert quantity, quantifier, whatever, at what point does it make sense for me to form an LLC? Is there a magic number there that people need to keep in mind, or?
No.
Okay.
It is, at what point can there's no threshold. There's no, here's a gross dollar figure, here's gross income that triggers a need for the LLC. It's at what point is what you're doing potentially creating enough liability that it's going to flow back to your personal assets. So for me at this point, I farm, I'm going to crop about 1,000 acres this year. I'm not in an LLC yet. I'm going to go that way eventually, but for right now, I can manage what I'm doing, and I'm buying as much insurance as possible. As I dedicate a lot of time to employee training, to safety materials, to not taking stupid risks that are foreseeable. I can handle that right now. Eventually, hopefully, I'm going to get on the other side of that balance sheet where I do have personal assets that I want to protect, and I think I will shift to an LLC situation there. And creating an LLC, unless you're doing it from the very beginning, there can be tax consequences from me gifting material into the LLC. And so that's something to consider. And that's something that is so uniquely personal to what you're doing as a farmer that you need to talk to a tax professional prior to doing that if you are going to kind of change horses midstream there. But there is no magic number. There's not something that I can think of that would be an automatic trigger, other than if you're getting to the point where you're not going to be able to stay on top of things pretty crisply, that might be a reason to go to an LLC, or if you're in a riskier activity to go to an LLC. But remember, the reason you're wanting to go, you're doubling down on the amount of effort that you're going to have to do to keep your books separate there. It's way easier to start with an LLC at the very beginning if that's a way that you're wanting to go.
Okay. And you mentioned piercing the corporate veil earlier and transfer of assets if you do elect to change from sole prop to an LLC. So is there, how would I say it? Is there a reason to transfer those assets, or can they stay with me as the owner, and then the LLC just functions as a way to run the business?
Yeah. Now, once you start thinking in those kind of terms, Spencer, the world's kind of your oyster. I
Okay.
have seen there's no one size fits all when it comes to the LLC, because I've seen things that vary dramatically. So farm ownership can be between spouses, and I'm talking about owning the dirt. The farm itself is owned by, say, Mr. and Mrs. Quarles. What I think is the most popular model among farmers is you have dirt, which is worth a whole lot of money. Maybe let's keep that in our names as a sole proprietorship. What creates the risk most often on a farm is the actual activity of the farm. So what you're actually doing on the farm, the running of equipment, the employing of folks to come on for harvesting, spraying, planting, picking, setting, whatever that is. Statistically, that's where most of your liability is going to come from, because you're employing people and those kind of outside forces are there. If nobody's ever coming onto your farm, then your potential for a lawsuit is probably pretty limited, right? Who is there to get harmed? If you want to go out and stand too close to a power takeoff and get your leg ripped off, great, that's on you. There's not a lawsuit involved there. And if you didn't bleed out, who are you going to sue other than yourself in that situation? It's when you start inviting employees to come onto the farm, you start inviting customers in particular to come onto your farm, a U-pick operation, cow shares, anything else, a CSA where people are coming to you and coming onto your farm. That changes the ball game completely, because now you're inviting the public, where before you were excluding the public. You can be as safe or as risky as you want. Once the public is coming to you, you all owe those people what are called legal duties to keep them safe. So if you're chancing that type of activity, that might be a trigger for an LLC in that situation. So I have seen where the Clint might own the farm, but I lease the farm to Quarles Farms LLC. So the LLC is the one actually conducting the somewhat dangerous activity, the actual activity of farming and employing people. They're going to keep the dirt in their name, but they're going to lease the farm to this LLC that is conducting the activity that they have made a calculation that in their farming operation might lead to the lawsuit in that situation. I've seen multiple LLCs. I've seen operating LLCs for the actual farming. And then I've seen farm owners also create LLCs for specific tasks. One may be for operation, like we just said. One may be owning the equipment in an LLC. The actual machinery is held by an LLC, and that gets fascinating, because then we're talking about changes of ownership, who owns the things, pools of maintenance and things like that. You can open that up, but the actual machines are owned by an LLC. So Quarles Farming LLC might rent from Quarles Equipment LLC. So there's a lot of operating agreements and lease agreements in there. And it's a way to put, again, the dangerous activities into an LLC while keeping Clint, the actual person, out of it. And another exceedingly popular use of an LLC involves transportation. If you own a semi and a grain trailer, or delivery vehicles, trucking of any sort, I've seen a lot of farmers elect to put the trucking entity into an LLC, and that kind of keeps that distinct from your own personal assets in that situation. So if you make a commitment to doing an LLC, Spencer, you can get as absolutely creative as possible. But I do think for most people, time would be very well spent doing a good risk analysis on, your operation better than anybody else. You know what is going to be risky in what you're doing, and you're talking about threat assessment in that situation. And I am sure all of you guys are pretty good at being able to analyze potential threats to you from a legal standpoint, and that comes from people. So your exposure to people, if you're going to do an LLC, I think that the activity that would put the public or employees near to you, that activity could be placed into an LLC. And so it's more about put the dangerous or the more dangerous activities into the thing that is the shield to you and your family from a financial standpoint. So I do think that an LLC is great in a situation like that. But an LLC, again, is not a substitute for a robust insurance product there too. The LLC still needs to be maintaining insurance. You personally need to be maintaining insurance. And it's not just the insurance to pay out the potential claim, that $100,000 that I've been using as an example. The insurance is much more than the $100,000 of coverage. The insurance also comes with an attorney that will defend that in court as well. So the insurance is going to be providing that legal coverage in most situations, depending on the insurance product that you purchase there. So you're not going to be forced to go out and just hire some random defense attorney in that situation. Now, that being said, in all of these LLCs, remember, we're talking about keeping things absolutely distinct from your person. But I just mentioned, I still want some insurance. I still want to carry farmer insurance for the farm that I'm going to own. Quarles Farms LLC, the operating entity, also needs to maintain insurance and coverage levels. So that is one of the problems that comes with an LLC, is you're talking about duplication of some expenses that are out there, Spencer. So you are going to have replication of expenses, because I've already mentioned you're going to be filing a distinct tax return for the LLC, and you're going to be carrying insurance. So at least you're paying for two additional products there. And then understanding, depending on the LLC and what you and your tax professional might come up with, you may or may not be being forced to pay taxes in a duplicative manner as well. And those are all tax elections there. You can have a flow through taxing structure at the federal level. And then a neat thing in Kentucky in the past couple of years, we have some flow through elections at the state level now. But just understand you are absolutely going to be paying at least the same amount of taxes in an LLC, if not 5 to 10% more in taxes, hypothetically, depending on the type of entity that you set up.
That's in comparison to a sole prop.
Yes, and prepare. So you are giving up something for the shield that you're desiring to keep the liability away from you and your family comes at a cost, and that cost is replication of some expenses, and you're going to be paying some additional tax to the government for the privilege of operating in one of those LLCs.
Okay, gotcha. Well, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody else on here to ask a few if they have any. But I get this question a lot, and you've talked about insurance in a few different ways. What should people be thinking about whenever they're looking for an insurance package, whether it's for the farm ownership itself, whether it's for coverage of people who might get hurt working for you, some kind of medical coverage. And then the other one that I get asked about a lot is I've got people coming onto my farm for agritourism events. What should I do to protect myself if something happens to those people?
Okay, yeah, those are all great questions. Number one, you need to write down what you're doing, everything that you're doing from a farming standpoint. And you need to give that to the agents, or if you're shopping insurance, to all of the potential agents you may be doing to get a quote. The very worst thing that you can do when it comes to insurance is not telling the people that are selling you insurance absolutely every activity that you're involved in. Insurance is a contract between you and the provider that reads as an if-then statement. If I get sued, then the insurance will kick in and it'll, list kind of coverage that's allowed to you, $100,000, $1 million, whatever it may be. Insurance companies operate as a profit center for the people that have them, own them, or put them together. Insurance is very, very good about writing in exclusions to their policy, meaning, look, if you're doing this, we're not going to cover you. And so there's an entire section of an insurance policy that comes down to exclusions from coverage, where they're essentially saying, look, we're very happy to sell you insurance, but if it falls in one of these categories, one of two things is going to happen. Number one, we're either absolutely not going to cover you whatsoever for that type of activity. Maybe having a private airfield on a farm, a lot of life insurance contracts that you provide, that is life insurance says insurance right in the name, but it's a contract that if I know personally, if I'm in a small helicopter or a small aircraft, my life insurance doesn't apply. What's fascinating, and my wife is very keen on this, is if I get dismembered as I'm dying, my life insurance pays out triple. So if I ever have an accident and I feel like I have that last minute to move, I'm going to try to lose a limb so that my family can, get 3 times as much money in that situation, because I'm a goner then anyway. But life insurance is contractually based. So you need to tell the people that you're operating, or that you're in a contractual relationship there, absolutely everything you're doing. So if you're employing people, you need to tell them. If you are applying chemicals on your farm, you need to make sure that that's very specifically included. If you have cattle, other types of livestock, you need to make sure that those things are specifically included. When I talked about the exclusion parts of a life insurance policy, they're not saying we will never insure you for those type of events. What they're really saying is, under this policy, these are exclusions. what you can get is something called a rider on top of that, is where you identify one of the things that would normally be an exclusion, and then you specifically include that thing, and it's usually for a few more dollars. If you're spraying on your own farm, if you're applying pesticides, there's a rider to that. It provides a few more dollars for that. If you are doing on-farm activities, you absolutely need to be telling your insurance agent that you're doing that. And if you do have agritourism events, you need to let them know that as well. Kentucky's gone through some pretty robust changes in how waivers are created. So agritourism has, as a function of it, because I saw Sharon on the call earlier, and she can explain our Kentucky agritourism promotional program that we have with the department. But as part of the agritourism statutes, you can have a pretty big shield, not as a function of insurance, but as a function of law, meaning that if somebody comes onto your farm and it is an activity that is inherently dangerous to farming, holes in the ground, rough terrain, somebody tripping over vines, vegetative material, things like that, they're barred from suit. They can't even sue you so long as you have this written waiver that comes with it and a sign that is posted on your property. So when you're doing that kind of stuff, tell your insurance agent, and they'll still want to sell you a rider to the kind of the baseline policy, but they'll also be able to instruct you on use of the signage and the waivers in that situation to not only protect you, but it protects them as well. So they have a pretty big interest in providing those things to you. But when it comes to insurance policies, just absolutely tell your agent absolutely everything that you're doing. I can't stress that enough. And if you all do start off the season with one thing in mind, and now all of a sudden you want to add that agritourism venue, you want to add some school trips, you want to add whoever else, some on-farm events, before you do it, talk to your insurance agent. You can't just treat that thing as a fire and forget. You need to go out there and make sure that your insurance agent knows what you're doing prior to you seeking that thing out. That's a really, really good question there.
Yeah, that's good. I actually took some notes to pass along to folks as well, because I get that question a lot, and so that's good to know.
Well, and then on that too, Spencer, when it comes to insurance, you guys really need to treat it as it's not just a one-time thing. It's like getting on a treadmill, and you just don't get off of that thing. Like possibly others of you on the call, I borrow money to farm. I have an operating note, I have a machinery note. And when I have bought and financed pieces of equipment in the past, I'm required to run insurance products to replace the piece of equipment in case the bank that gave me money lost their tractor, lost the combine, had a fire, whatever it was, that they're still reimbursed for the value of that thing. Otherwise, I've got a loan on something that is essentially scrap metal. About a month and a half ago, I actually went back through my policy, and I'm very diligent about adding insurance to new pieces of equipment that I've bought. What I've not been very good about is removing the coverage after I've sold that piece of equipment or transferred it. So there were 5 or 6 pieces of equipment on there that I haven't owned for years, so that I've been paying insurance on all of this time. Now, from a liability standpoint, I'm no worse off by having something listed that I don't own anymore. What's much more important is having everything that I own listed on that coverage policy. The only thing that I was dumb about is I paid premiums on things for a long time when I could have been saving those dollars.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because I just did that. We try and do it yearly with my insurance broker, and doesn't always happen every year, but we just sat down and did it before the holidays. And it's like, there were some things on there that he had written down. I guess we just miscommunicated. It's like, I don't even know what I've insured here for X amount of dollars,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
I don't have that.
And ask your agent for a copy of everything and then go check it. Check the serial numbers, check everything else. Because as much as I love my insurance provider, remember at the end, once there's an actual claim, your insurance provider might be very interested in a reason to exclude your coverage. So don't give them a reason to. Make sure everything's up front, and you'll have had a discussion about it, and it's in writing. If you all have a question to your insurance providers, email them, no phone calls. Have whatever it is in writing in that communication too.
Yeah. Well, to the folks that are on the call, we've covered a lot of things. Does anybody have any questions about what we've covered, or any questions of their own that we haven't talked about yet tonight?
Man, that's not very encouraging. There's Terry Varney.
All right. You know, I got a couple, but so might be dumb. I don't know. I'm probably the only person in the room that doesn't know this, but as that sole prop or that DBA, just having that, you can still go get a business loan or operating loans and all of those kind of things. It's for the DBA, but it's just you personally are responsible for ensuring that note and all that stuff gets met. And if it doesn't, they can come after, whatever else it is you own as well, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so what you're asking, there's a blended question. I think one is about insurance and who's insuring it. You are. So you're going as the sole proprietor of the DBA and insuring it. But the second part of that was about obtaining a loan or financial assistance. And that's one that I didn't talk about a minute ago. So when I go to a lender, they're going to take my social security number, they're going to run it, they're going to figure out if I'm credit worthy enough to lend money to. And then based on ratings from credit companies that include, payment histories there in the past, they will decide whether or not to loan Clint Quarles some money. When you create Ryan Farms there, LLC, well, your LLC is not going to have a credit history. So there's not going to be anything for them to run, even if you created the LLC and then immediately sought something that is somewhat similar to your social security number. You can seek what's called an EIN, an employee identification number federally. There's other types of numbers that you can get, but one that is involved in the lending process for businesses is called a DUNS number. Even if you go out and get that thing, there's not going to be a lending history with that newly created LLC. In that situation, the bank's not going to loan just to the LLC. They're going to say, we're loaning to the LLC, but we're seeking a personal guarantee. It's kind of like co-signing for a car for somebody in your family. You co-sign for a car because the bank doesn't think that the other person's going to pay, and they want you to pay in case the other person can't. In an LLC situation, you sign something called a personal guarantee, where it essentially says, if the LLC doesn't pay, you are going to pay personally, and that is for the note that is given to the LLC, not the liability. Meaning, if you needed a $10,000 or $100,000 line of credit and the LLC can't pay it for whatever reason, you are exposing yourself to whatever the term of that agreement is, $10,000, $100,000, whatever it is. You're only personally liable to what you personally guaranteed in that situation. But that's a really good question.
And then
did I answer it? That's probably
you did,
okay.
and that's what I was understanding is I was like, how do I establish that business credit? And you answered that with the basically, I am co-signing for the business, saying
Yes.
if the business doesn't pay it, since you don't know them, they have no credit history, I will take care of that. But so,
And that's
and you get
lending. So,
right,
so
just
with,
lending.
yeah, and that's
Just lending.
lending. And that is not a situation where you put the toe in the door. That's not going to expose you to the liability. It's only going to be to the extent that you co-signed for lack of a better term.
Right. I understand it. Just after being in the military for 24 years and had a guaranteed paycheck on the 1st and the 15th, no matter what the economy was doing, as we kind of step out and start getting into this agricultural things, there's some, potential like, hey, I may need to pay up for some things that I'll get when I sell the cows. Like,
Yeah.
now I've just been doing it by, my allowance that my wife allows me to have, because I'm also in one of those general partnership deals where like I do the work, I take care of the things, then we go to the sale barn and she gets the check.
You're about to get yourself in big trouble.
Yeah.
You just be cautious, or that
Yeah.
death and
Well, she can
dismemberment
see me
thing might
right over the
spring
top of the
forward.
laptop right now.
Okay,
And it's
good.
not the whole eye. She's looking at me with just this side portion.
Well,
So
you might get strangled later.
yeah, that's
But
that life insurance thing you talk about. I think she knows
right,
about that dismemberment portion and is looking to check up on that real quick. But
sharpen the knife.
when I go, so as a DBA, I can have that EIN, and that
Mhm.
DBA can get an operating loan or borrow money for a piece of equipment or whatever.
Because
And
it's
then
still you. Yes. Yeah.
and then but is it under that EIN or is it my social security? There's no EIN
You're
to
going to
the
be
DBA.
any of the actual lending that takes place for the business there will be to you. And more than likely, it's going to be to you and spouse, particularly if land is involved there. So it'll be to all title owners on land if we're talking about a mortgage or something like that, to purchase a farm or refinance or something like that. Now, if it's an equipment loan or an operating loan, the lending institution may require you and your spouse to sign, but the loan is actually to you. The DBA, they may list that as, let's say, Green Acres Farm or something like that. That might be an additional identifier to who they're lending to, but in a sole proprietorship or DBA, the lending will track a social security number.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then let's just say we're gonna forego all of it. We're gonna start the LLC right off the bat. What does that process look like as far as from a timeline standpoint? Like if I decide right now that tomorrow morning I'm ready to start the paperwork to start an LLC, what does that process look like from a timeline standpoint, as well as from a financial standpoint, as far as how much that's going to cost me, or I can expect that to cost about so much and take about so long or whatever?
Okay, well, those are all good questions. Let me try to answer them in order. Back in, September, October, that was the last time that I created an LLC. I did one for myself, for a mediation service business that I'm doing now. And I did one for my wife's cousin. And I said, hey, Allie, what do you want the name of this to be? And he told me the name, and he called me back. I think we looked, and it was like 11 minutes later, and said, nope, I'd rather have this other name. And I'm like, tough luck, you're already an LLC. So I ended up creating 2 LLCs, and it took about 15 minutes. It absolutely does not take any time at all to do that.
What if you're not a lawyer and you're an Army grunt with an Indiana public education?
I was going to support you on the Army grunt business, but once you said Indiana public education, am I speaking too quickly for you? Any of that, I can slow down if you need to. And
if you
I'm
get
only
some
about
cards
halfway
to
laughing
hold up
on
with
this.
pictures.
I'm a Kentucky public school product. We have very little we can make fun of. So just tell me that.
That's fair.
It's pretty easy. The Secretary of State has gone to a one-site business portal. And I think it was pretty easy to do that. I don't think it requires any special training. Maybe as recently as a couple years ago, I would have said maybe, step through one and read about it. But you can absolutely go out and create an LLC on your own. That does not require any special training. Indiana or not, it's pretty simple to follow there. I have absolute faith that you could wade through that thing. And the other thing is it's very different than a baby. Because I talked about it, you're kind of giving birth to a little legal baby. A real baby, if you don't feed it or take care of it and it dies, people are going to come ask you some questions. With the LLC, there's not really a consequence necessarily for doing it incorrectly. You might be out a filing fee. And actually, in your all situation, everyone on this call that was a military veteran, you're essentially get a large chunk of those fees, if not all of them, waived currently with the Secretary of State. So it's actually a pretty good deal there. So even if you do mess it up, then just make sure you have the name right the first time and you don't create two LLCs right back to back there. But I think you could do it. Now, the danger there becomes is it's incredibly easy to create one on paper. It's all the rest of the follow through that you may need some assistance and guidance with, and K-Card is great at that. So it's setting up operating agreements. It is keeping and maintaining corporate minutes, keeping good books, all of that kind of stuff. And that really is a partnership between you and your tax professional in that situation. So it's not the creation isn't the pain in the butt. It is the doing everything else to keep the legal baby happy and alive. That's the tougher thing. If you would for some reason feel more comfortable with an attorney setting that stuff up, you can go that route. But I would investigate the one-stop business portal online before I did that. Plus, I'm a farmer. I am not going to spend a single nickel that I don't absolutely have to in that situation. They're just hard to make there.
Well, with the way my wife's got my allowance set up, it would really take quite a bit of time for me to get enough nickels lined up to do that. So I'm sure Taryn can help me with those operating stuffs, but she only helps me when I remember to call her and follow up like I'm supposed to.
And guys, I will keep pressing that. Your business partners. Now I'm not talking about a general partnership. I mean, the people that your assets can only help yourself if you tell them what you're doing and you maintain communication with them. They're going to be busy, and good work gets you more good work. So yeah, she's not going to know to follow up with you unless you're taking the initiative and seeking her out first. All of those are great questions. So yeah, I would just give the Kentucky Secretary of State, and it's the one-stop business portal. Give that thing a try.
Clint, this is Mike Castle. I got a question. What's the safest way to capitalize or fund the LLC? Operating agreement, loan? What's the safest way to fund it?
That gets fascinating, Mike. You can fund the LLC with initially putting in money in a variety of ways. First, you're going to talk to your tax person, unless you're doing your taxes yourself. There are all kinds of creative ways that you are giving a loan essentially to this new baby creature that's out there, so that you're just not giving away, let's say, $10,000 of initial startup operating money, that you're writing a loan from you to the LLC. And that way you hypothetically have some sort of lien or priority claim on lending to that new entity that you've started. That loan, in order to survive, if you ever got into a situation where the loan would be criticized because you're your own creditor at that point, is that thing would need to be in writing. It would need to be signed by the agent of the LLC, which also may be you. And if you are going to create something like that, talk to your tax professional. And then number two, you're going to memorialize that thing and then maintain it in a place that has a time and date stamp. So you're going to be emailing that thing to yourself. It's not just going to be a piece of paper in a file where somebody later on can say, oh, well, you know, we made that up after the fact. You're going to create that thing, and then you're going to store it in a manner where its veracity can't be challenged. I like emailing things to myself that are time sensitive, because that way you've kind of always got it, and it's free storage most of the time as well. Sometimes it's nice having those things handy anyway, documents like that, in case you are in a situation where you need to get that to somebody quickly for decision making.
Thank you.
But in terms of doing that, there you can, it depends on the what and the how much and the mechanics of it. That all has to do with the type of entity that you're wanting to create. You know, a semi-trucking operation, to fund that the first time, I don't think 10 grand is going to go very far. But in terms of vegetable production or something where it's not super capital intensive, but it's very labor intensive, 10 grand might go a long way in a situation like that. And then you can do, at least for even year one or something like that, a series of loans from yourself to this thing to fund it for its, you know, initial startup years. And then how you take distributions back from that or capital reimbursements would be something you've already talked to your tax professional about, and to structure those in a manner that would be not tax avoidance, but tax minimalization. Something that might be critiqued on something like that. Normally, I doubt you're going to loan me a lot of money interest free, right, Mike? I mean, any business person's not going to do that. So the note from you to the LLC might include provisions for interest to make it look like it's a real thing that you've done. And in a situation like that, you've also created taxable interest from the lending activity that you've done. So some of the tax consequences, creating the LLC creates a potential for a whole slew of headaches from little minor details like that. And that's why you're going to have a team assembled, or at least thought of on the front end, and ask questions like that. I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Mike, did that capture it?
Yes, yes. The interest and everything, it's just, it's taken me about 2 or 3 years to get up and running, and I put some initial capital up early on. And I'm trying to figure out how to capture that.
Did you already create the LLC? Is it?
Oh yeah, when I created the LLC is when I put the capital up. I've not got it in production yet.
So you're in a situation now, you'd like to get your startup money back. But that may take place in the form of a distribution, which is a taxable event. So you're wanting your money back in a non-taxable form. I would talk to your accountant about that, because that can be a little bit tricky to get it back where it's well documented. And it's a deduction for the actual LLC, but you may have, depending on how your person prepares that stuff now, you may have something about book value already included in that big packet of material they send you home with. There might be something in there already that talks about that.
Sounds good.
I think this is great. I like the questions. Does anybody else have anything else? Taryn, is there anything you get asked a lot that we haven't talked about?
Well, I do have one. There was a person today actually that asked me if they need to have, because they're just starting out and they're going to be planning on selling at farmers markets. And so they don't have any income coming in currently, but plan to have income, when the market starts. And they were wanting to know when they should set up their LLC, if they should go ahead and do it now or when revenue starts coming in.
Okay. So in that situation, if they know that they want to elect the LLC, I would do it now, because otherwise it's not real. Let's just say that they elected to wait until the revenues started coming in. Now, Clint, as the individual farmer, has put the produce out. I have got all of my labor involved in it. I have created a product. Now I'm going to market for the very first time. And now it's all of a sudden an LLC. Well, how did the LLC get the fruits and vegetables that I'm going to go to sell? So even then, that's evidence that it wasn't real. A lot of businesses don't get to just, have zero input cost, but get the revenue that kind of comes from it. So in that situation, they're wanting the shield without any of the work that kind of goes behind it. So if they know for a certainty that they want to operate in the LLC, go on and set it up now. That way, at least the crop in the ground and everything absolutely belongs to them. And that way they've got the correct expenses that would align back with the sales stuff that they would have. So if you're going to do it, you got to do it all correctly and start it. So why not? Why not go on and do that? I wouldn't see a sense in delaying that. Other than it does take time, and operating in an LLC, I think a lot of people discount how much book work that kind of stuff really is. And it really is a know thyself moment. People know or have a pretty good idea if they have the capacity or bandwidth for book work. I'm convinced in my farming career, I've made more money sitting in an office chair like this than I ever had holding a steering wheel or fixing something or finding yet another broken hydraulic line. I've never really made it like that. I've had plenty of time to think and contemplate life when I'm out there, but actually making money is a function in farming of the book work and the stuff that's not as much fun. And there are some people that don't want that. The joy in farming is the process and being outside, and it's not the inside work, so to speak. So, but if you're going to operate in an LLC, if you know that you're not good at the inside work, an LLC is not going to serve your purpose, because you're not going to be able to keep those nice, crisp, distinct books like you're supposed to.
Thank you. The other question that I have is, did you and Spencer coordinate your outfits?
I am a lot better looking than Spencer. Look at this. I mean, I've got these are
No
good
doubt.
kids. And I'm not going to say something, Spencer, because it's been a while since I've seen you, but Spencer is going down the path of being a hair loss enthusiast. And I've got a great big that headband is strategic. I think maybe in his situation right there, but no, we did not coordinate. This was
Okay.
I actually had nice clothes to wear for this that I packed in my car, and I was hoofing it down the hallway to get in here for my computer to not work here. But no, we didn't coordinate. It's kind of a great minds situation.
Taryn, they do look awfully cute together, though.
I mean, it's horrible. I'm just saying.
We just didn't get the memo.
We didn't. I mean, I could